Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast with me, your host, Ngalim Bernard. At the Beyond Africa podcast, we tell African stories that change lives. As usual, thank you so much for liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. We love the comments. They make us think. They make us evaluate the content we give to you. We are almost 16,000 subscribers right now. Who is going to be that person to hit that button to say 16,000? Oh, yay! Beyond Africa. Today we are back in Cameroon and we're discussing Tchiroma and Kamto. These are two names that the regime tries to silence at the moment, but it is becoming difficult. Two voices that the regime fears, not because they wield violence, but because they wield legitimacy. Today, their stories intersect with a third voice, a third force, a force that is proving to be very vital for Cameroon's transition. That is Manidem, the movement for African new independence and democracy. If you would recall, this is Anissa Ekané's party. We pay homage to Anissa Ekané, who has been detained since before October 12, 2025, and is currently undergoing serious medical conditions. His oxygen supplier was taken away from him, and as we learned, he would be going to court very soon, despite the fact that he is sick. In a powerful communique issued in Yaoundé on October 12, 2025, Manidem openly condemned the occupation of the CRM headquarters and the invasion of Professor Maurice Kamto's residence. Manidem describes these actions by the Yaoundé regime as illegitimate and anti-democratic. They demanded the immediate withdrawal of all police and gendarmerie deployed to suffocate the CRM party. Let us note that when different political traditions or schools of thought or approaches to politics begin speaking with the same voice towards the same direction, that is, when Tchiroma, Kamto, and Anissa Ekané converge, approach one problem from the same angle, and propose the same solutions, the country should understand that something is seriously shifting. This is why the regime trembles. This is why the regime believes in arresting and detaining everyone. The question then becomes, is fear at the heart of the regime? Does the regime fear Issa Chiruma Bakary because he did what the institutions of the state refused to do? That is, he published election results directly from polling stations, polling station by polling station. Electoral has refused to publish their own results from polling stations. The Constitutional Council declared the winner of the elections, but has not cared to ensure that the results are published from polling station to polling station. The only verifiable data available to the public, to you, to me, to everyone, are the results that Chiroma's team published. And according to those results, Tchiroma won the election. And so the question that cuts across the country now is very simple. Is the regime refusing to publish results because it knows that the results do not show that Paul Biya won the elections, and therefore Paul Biya is not a legitimate president? This takes us to also wonder if the regime fears Maurice Kamto because he embodies constitutional resistance. Remember, Maurice Kamto has had many cases in front of the Constitutional Council just to ensure that the electoral process complies with constitutional guarantees and the electoral code. His political party is built on legitimacy and legality and not force. On Friday, 28 November 2025, that is yesterday, police and gendarmes surrounded his residence without a warrant, without a court order, and above all, without explanation. This de facto house arrest is a confession of fear, not strength. The regime fears Manidem because it refuses to be intimidated. Remember, Anissa Ekané prefers to go to jail than to say Issa Chiruma Bakary did not win the election. In Manidem's communique, they condemn Yaoundé's illegitimate power and call the blockade of MRC's headquarters as a violation in a long catalogue of abuses by the defeated CPDM regime. They urge all opposition forces to stand together and reject this umpteenth assault on democracy. Political parties, especially those of the opposition, have an obligation to stand up whenever one of them is attacked. This we don't see in Cameroon. But luckily, we now see the MRC, the FSNC of Issa Chiruma Bakary and Manidem bringing their voices together. It is not late. Other opposition parties need to stand up, especially when the rights of citizens and the rights of political parties are being violated in broad daylight. This is an action that calls for opposition solidarity to resolve the problems of Cameroon. If all opposition parties recognize that the elections were not free, fair, and transparent, it is therefore at this moment that they need to stand up and say, you are exercising illegitimate power, and that illegitimate power cannot continue because you are violating rights of citizens and rights of political parties, as enshrined by the Constitution. We'll talk about this later. When different wings of the political spectrum all denounce the same repression, the regime can no longer pretend that this is about public order. It is about the survival of a system that knows nothing, that no longer commands public trust. Public order has become a term that the regime abuses left, right, and center. The regime no longer attaches any value to classical definitions of terms, as everyone should know. It is a legal principle that every term must have a definition so that citizens are put on guard, so that citizens know when they are violating that law. But in Cameroon, the term public order is left at the discretion and the interpretation of administrative authorities. They alone know what that term means. In the communique banning the MSS convention, the DIO says that at the request of a single individual, Okala Ebode, claiming that public order was threatened, he is suspending that convention. Who then determines if public order is being threatened? Is it the administrative authorities or is it single or private individuals? This regime continues showing to Cameroonians that it does not believe in the rule of law. It is definitely shown to Cameroonians that the siege or the blockade of the MRC's headquarters is an act of illegality coupled with illegitimacy. But for one thing, let us be clear. The siege around Kamto's residence is a violation of the Constitution of Cameroon. It violates Kamto's freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and the right to participate in political life. It also violates international treaties ratified by Cameroon. These treaties include the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. These are not opinions. These are binding legal documents. By binding legal documents, it simply says, according to Article 45 of Cameroon's Constitution, that every international treaty signed and ratified by Cameroon becomes law in Cameroon, whether the National Assembly has legislated on that issue or not. And it becomes law and superior to national law. If there is any law in Cameroon that contradicts an international treaty, the international treaty becomes supreme and rules in place of that law. These, again, are not opinions. They are simple legal facts as enshrined in Cameroon's constitution. And the law must be respected in a state where the government is legitimate and legal. But in a system where the regime lacks legitimacy and lacks legality, what do they turn to? They turn to force. Use of the police, use of the military, use of the gendarmes to ensure that their will becomes the law. And in response to the siege at the headquarters, the CRM's urgent press release highlights the same illegality we've been talking about. They are clear. The siege has no warrant, no court order, and no justification. Only political fear dressed in uniform of the state. This is why Manidem's condemnation matters. This is why Chiroma's declaration and support of the MRC and Maurice Kamto matters. And this is why Kamto's resilience should also matter. Taken together and put together, all these create a united front that the regime cannot easily discredit. Just imagine Issa Chiruma Bakary, Maurice Kamto, and Anissa Ekané coming together and standing strong, going forward and declaring that they would work together to ensure that the results from the ballot box are respected and not any fabricated results. What would happen in Cameroon? Definitely there will be change, and that change must reflect the will of the people. But if they come together, would the regime be happy? The question then becomes, why does the regime fear unity so much? The regime has always preferred a divided opposition, fragmented and suspicion of one another, an opposition that is unable to coordinate their efforts. But today, the landscape is changing. Chiruma's insistence on transparency, Kamto's principled defiance, and Manidem's public denunciation, and of course, the rising civic consciousness across the country has created a convergence that the regime did not anticipate. Even if other political party leaders like Joshua Osei and Cabral Libi are not participating in this moment of transition, the message is clear. When political actors who once disagreed now agree on one thing, and that one thing is the regime no longer respects legality, then the crisis has moved beyond politics. It has become a crisis of national legitimacy, a crisis that says the regime in Yaoundé does not represent the people, a crisis that says other opposition leaders, Joshua Osei, Cabral Libi, and all the others, think twice. The moment is changing, times are changing, and the will of the people must be respected. The people have their own weapons in their own hands, weapons that can peacefully and legitimately bring down dictatorial regimes. It looks like we're getting towards that moment. But how can Cameroonians get to that moment? Ghost towns have always been a historical weapon that citizens use to bring down despots in some countries. Cameroonians, however, know the language of democratic resistance. You can talk about 1992, you can talk about 1997, you can talk about the Anglophone crisis, 2008. All these are actions that have been put together by Cameroonians. They have learned it from history across the continent, right across in the southern Cameroons, call it Nozo, South Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan, Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, name any country you want. These countries have used ghost towns and peaceful popular uprisings to overturn despots. You can ask Blaise Compaoré, former president of Burkina Faso. You can ask Robert Mugabe, may his soul rest in peace, of Zimbabwe. You can ask the apartheid regime in South Africa. All these were brought down by peaceful resistance. Therefore, ghost towns have always been the instrument of the powerless when the powerful shut every other door. They are not born from violence. Ghost towns are born from the refusal to legitimize injustice. Once you know there is injustice and you comply with that injustice, you are legitimizing injustice. You are making injustice sound legal. You are making injustice sound normal. That is why, unto this moment, observers are wondering, why would opposition leaders who say that the results from the ballot box have not been respected comply and respect the ongoing regime? This is a moment to listen to Tchiroma. Tchiroma has called for ghost towns. And what do ghost towns say? Ghost towns speak a very simple language. They say, you cannot force us to participate in our own oppression, because by refusing to respect the results of the ballot box, the regime is oppressing the citizens. And by ghost towns, you sit home, you don't go out, you tell the regime, you are oppressing us and we are not going to participate in that. And how do you participate in that? When you pay taxes to the government, the regime takes this money, embezzles some, uses some to buy weapons and tactical gear that they use against you. Think about the guns, the bullets, the tear gas that they throw at you, even the salaries that they pay to these police officers who come out to do all this, even the judges who condemn you to prison terms without any shred of evidence, without a legal process, without a procedure that respects the norms and canons of legal procedure. Why? Because the regime specifically gives this class of people some benefits that the rest do not have. This class of people see themselves as a special class of people in Cameroon, a class of people in Cameroon who have advantages that the rest do not have. You remember the results from Enam recently? All their top children have been sent to Enam. And what do they give you? The Minister of Youth and Youth Affairs, he gave your children, our children, bicycles or motorcycles to ride as Bensikin, Okada people. Is that normal? In Douala, they are doing the same. They claim they are professionalizing the Okada riding. But their own children are good for Enam, Emir, Irik, all the other schools where they come out from there as top guns. One of their children, I think is Eyebe Ayesi's child, was recently appointed as a director general in one of the biggest corporations in Cameroon. Why is that opportunity not given to you? Why is it not given to me? Why is it given to their own children and you and I are good for Okadas? And as soon as we get onto the Okada, what happens? We are paid. We pay the Okada pays taxes, and those taxes get to the government. What does the government do? They create a special class of people who feel special and believe that they have the right to determine what happens to you or what happens to me. When that happens, there is no government because the voice of the people, incarnated in what is called the right to public participation in governance, is taken away from you, is taken away from me. And it's their business. Only they have it. So it is in this line that Issa Chiruma Bakary has called for the ghost towns. Why? Because silence becomes a loud shout. Immobility becomes a march, though you are not moving. Absence becomes a vote. Because by being absent, you are telling them, we will not comply with illegal orders. We will not comply unless the results from the ballot box are respected. This is why ghost towns frighten authoritarian regimes more than protests do. You can police a protest, but you cannot police silence. Do you get that? You can send out the police to kill, shoot, oppress, torture, and even kidnap people who are protesting on the streets. But once people stay home silent, you cannot police them, you cannot kill them. Even though we know in rogue regimes, they will come break up your doors, force you to your stores, and maybe even kill you if you don't. This shows that the regime is at war with legitimacy. Why? The pattern is now unmistakable. A regime that refuses to publish election results from the polling station so that everybody sees who voted where, how, and when. A regime that deploys the police to block political meetings. A regime that besieges the homes of opposition leaders. A regime condemned by multiple opposition parties, including Manidem, FSNC, and MRC, which explicitly call the regime illegitimate. A regime terrified of transparency, terrified of numbers, terrified of dissent. And the deeper question now becomes unavoidable. Does the regime fear the people because it knows the people did not choose it? Think about this question. Because, if the regime had nothing to hide, the results from every polling station would be public. If the regime trusted its own legitimacy, Kamto's house would not be surrounded by police. If the regime believed in its popular mandate, it would not fear Chiruma's data. It would welcome it and it would say, okay, this is what you are publishing as results from the polling stations. Let us compare with what we have. Chiruma sit on this side of the table, CPDM sit on this side of the table, other political parties and civil society on this side of the table, international observers on this side of the table. Let us compare the results. But because they do not believe that what they have and have published are legitimate, it is absolutely difficult for them to do that. Legitimacy does not hide behind gendarmes. It is very clear. Only insecurity decides to cloak itself with gendarmes and police officers, which, of course, some of those gendarmes and police officers have made it very clear they are not interested in this. But because they are of the force, they are of the military, they are compelled to do that. But there comes a time in every country, in every despotic regime, when the gendarmes and the police and the military would say, enough is enough. Are we going towards that direction already? Chiruma already gave us some glimpse. The loyal forces protected him out of Cameroon. He's in Gambia today, not because he wants to be in Gambia, but because if he stays in Cameroon, illegitimacy, illegality would prime over him. The change he is bringing to Cameroon can be brought from the Gambia. Be careful. Don't mistake a lion's gentle strides for weakness. They could be his ultimate strength. When the lion pitches to get an animal, it does not miss it. because it strikes gently. However, there is a message to Cameroonians at home and abroad, and this message is very important, especially to those in the diaspora. You in the diaspora, you know what democracy looks like. Your voice matters more than the regime wants you to believe. You in the diaspora, you have participated in democracies. You know what public opinion or public participation means. You know how to participate. You know how to make regimes strong. You know what it takes when a politician launches calls for support, financial, logistical, human resources. These politicians always put this together in one basket. Chiruma definitely needs this at this material moment. To the youth, you are not too young to demand a country that respects your dignity. In other countries, you would find somebody 26, 30, even 40 calling himself a youth. But in Cameroon, you find people at 50 calling themselves youth. What abnormality. What abnormality. In other countries, you find people who are 26 years, 27 years, being ministers, heads of public corporations. But in Cameroon, if you are not 60, you are not considered. What abnormality. Cameroonian youth, you are not good for the motorcycle. You are not good for the bicycle. You are not good to be an Okada man. You are good to be someone who uses his brains to create wealth for your country. We can talk about wealth creation, and we'll definitely talk about wealth creation in another video. But the youth of Cameroon are far more valuable than this regime is making them look. Chiruma pitched his campaign on valorizing trade and vocational education. That is what the youth should be looking at. Trade and vocational education permits the creation of wealth, generation of money, circulation of money in an economy. That is what changes economies. We'll talk about that in a different video, how to go about that. This moment is not just about Kamto. It is not about Chiruma or Manidem. It is about you, the youth, you, the diasporan, and you, the Cameroonian. It is about you and your right to know the truth, your right to speak up freely, and your right to choose your leaders. The question openly, publicly, and fearlessly. If the regime is legitimate, why does it hide? If the regime has the mandate, why does it fear transparency? If the regime won the election, why didn't they publish the results? Ask these questions. Ask them loud and clear. Let anyone who knows the answers tell you. No regime can police its way to legitimacy. Never. Legitimacy comes from the people and the people alone. One day, the walls built around the lie or illegitimacy will crack. You remember the Berlin Wall? It fell down. One day, the silence forced on the nation will turn into a collective disgruntlement. You remember Burkina Faso? That is how Blaise Compaoré went. One day, Cameroon will belong not to a regime, but to its citizens. You know what happens in Kenya, Nigeria? The citizens decide their leaders. And when that day comes, it will be because leaders like Kamto, Tchiroma, Anissa Ekané, and all others working with them. Barrister Alice Nkom, Eric Chinje, all those who are going over and beyond, those who have chosen courage over fear, would stand tall because the people believe that they are preaching the right message and that they stand for transparency, for democracy, and for the republic that Cameroonians deserve. A country where people would feel and accept that decisions of justice are just because they would see justice being done. A country where people would accept to pay taxes because they would see their money in taxes being used for them. A country where people would generate wealth by using their own resources where they are. They would not need to escape to go to foreign lands to have a living. A country where vocational and technical training would be more valuable than talk shows and TV talks every Sunday on TV. A country where the government would approach the citizens and talk to the citizens as if citizens have a voice, because citizens have a right to participate in public governance. Not a government where government ministers insult citizens every day. You go out to demonstrate and a government minister says you have been manipulated because he believes Cameroonians cannot think. Cameroonians don't know when results from the ballot box are not respected. Is that the kind of government we want? When you go out to demonstrate, he says you are drug addicts because they believe you don't have a mind of your own to think and act on your behalf. That is a country that Chiruma says it's over. And Cameroonians in their large majority are standing with Chiruma. Chiruma's call for ghost towns for Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday are a symbolic gesture to show where the power belongs. And Cameroonians who respect these ghost towns have the power in their hands. The power is not elsewhere. The power is in the hands of Cameroonians. When citizens stand together, stand tall, stand strong, they always win. What a time to be alive. What a time to follow Cameroonian politics. For the Beyond Africa podcast, I have been your host, Ngalim Bernard. As usual, thank you so much for liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. We love the comments. They make us think. They make us evaluate the content we give to you. We are almost 16,000 subscribers right now. Who is going to be that person to hit that button to say 16,000? Oh yeah, we are together with you and we're building that very strong community. We are in the process of thinking different forms of content we'll bring to you just to create value and enhance the African community, the African youth to stand strong. See you in our next episode of the Beyond Africa podcast.